All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Trailblazers webinar today. My name is Cheryl O'Connor. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Income Conductor, an innovative and award-winning retirement income planning technology that engages your clients in the planning process and provides them with a written plan that gives them the confidence and peace of mind they are seeking throughout their retirements. Joining me is my co-host, Mark Butler, a consultant to wealth management and wealth tech firms and founder of Wealth Management GPT. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Cheryl. How you doing today?
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And just to set the stage for those of you attending your first Trailblazer webinar, this series highlights the people in our industry who are forging new paths and developing new ways to achieve success while providing great outcomes for your clients. We welcome your questions, so please type them into the Q&A box and we will address them at the end of the webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome our Trailblazer today, Scott Fulton. Scott is president of Home Ideations, LLC, and is an innovative thought leader in aging well, with unique insights in the aging experience and extending healthspan, wealth, and resilience. Scott is past president of the National Aging in Place Council and serves as a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, a council member of the True Health Initiative, a board member of Propion Therapeutics, and a lecturer at the Universities of Virginia and Delaware. Scott has co-authored multiple books and recently launched his new book, Whealthspan, which quickly became a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And he wants us to know that he walks the talk, as he has completed multiple athletic challenges from death racing to Ironman triathlons. Welcome, Scott, and congratulations on the success of your new book.
Thanks, Cheryl. Good to be with you and Mark and your audience this morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So can you tell us a bit about your background and why you decided to focus on aging, health, and wealth?
Sure. My background is in engineering. I trained in engineering and mechanical. And if you know anything about engineers, mechanical engineers are known to be jack of all trades and master of none. I kind of took that and on steroids and just found myself taking a lot of new challenges over the course of my career. And I said yes to a lot of things, which meant that I moved into a lot of different businesses. A period in DuPont where I was in 4 businesses over the course of 8 years. So every 2 years, they were putting me in a new business. So that just kind of, I think, reflected a lot of the choices and willingness to try some things as I went through my career. And so I developed, and out of school, I went right into research. I was in and out of research a couple of times, so I got familiar with data. I quite like data. I like what data can do, and I found managers were always struggling to make decisions because they didn't have enough data. And so I developed, I think, a knack for understanding what data was compelling, what data was reliable, and what data was, you can make data say anything you want. That was never, no one ever has ever asked me to make the data say anything, and I'm always interested in what does the data tell us. The data always has things to teach us. So I've continued research either as principally or just out of my continuing curiosity over the years. I was in my career was at the top floor of the DuPont headquarters selling technology to different countries around the world, and I said, this is not my thing. I'm really about health and about people, and what am I going to do with the next career? And so I couldn't jump out the window, so I had to went down the elevator and started my business to really focus on primarily aging in the U.S. What does it mean? What's going on? I think growing up really was where my curiosity started. I was able to meet a number of business leaders, executives who had no shortage of wealth, but their success in retirement was surprisingly difficult to predict. And I'd long wondered, what is it? So it's clearly not money. Obviously, money helps, but there's more to retirement success than money. And so what are these clearly very smart people, well-resourced people, what are they missing? And as I started to dig into it, I discovered that a lot of us are missing some of the basics, because it's that big gap, or the elephant in the room, perhaps, of conversations that we're not having, that smart people are quite willing to get into, but no one starts the conversation. And I think that's really where I said, I think there's a place here to start some conversations amongst professionals to be able to start to change the trajectory. And I'll say part of my research would be the message of, if you don't know it already, that life expectancy flatlined in the US in 2010. And if you follow that, I've looked at over 55 million deaths as credibility for this. Every year since 2010, for every person that's lived longer, one is dying sooner. That's unprecedented in modern history. It challenges everything we believe about medicines keeping us all alive longer. We've got to make some fundamental changes here on our approach to retirement and aging. And they're all very doable things. This isn't a question of science. It's more about conversations and getting some education going.
Well, I have a family of engineers, so I can appreciate your love of data. and it's so important, and the impact of health on somebody's retirement income plan cannot be overstated. But you also believe that decisions around home and where the retiree lives, how they live, are also equally important to those health conversations. Can you expound on that?
Sure. It's so maybe kind of just as a high spot reference, most people at this point have heard about the blue zones. They've done a lot of good job, or a lot of good work to build awareness around it. So in the US, for example, there are over 60 communities that have life expectancies of over 90. No one knows where they are because we don't talk about them, right? And they're usually electoral districts is how the census builds that out. So they're communities of about 4,000 people. So we know longevity can happen here in the US, and it can happen with a Western lifestyle. But what we don't understand, or we don't seem to acknowledge, is what are the things that really threaten us in retirement. And as much as we focus on market fluctuations, when do we want to buy? How do we want to change the portfolio as we move through life, and de-risk it as though those are going to have big impacts? They quickly pale as soon as someone goes into a care facility, for example, and the money starts to flow out at $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year, and now we'll blow that out to say, well, now we have a couple, younger spouse, for example, one has a fall, and this happens. This is why I kind of say, when I work with the National Aging Place Council, these are the things I hear about every day. Someone relatively young has a fall, or has they stroke, some debilitating event happens, unforeseen, requires care, and they're not going to recover from it, but they require care. They're relatively young, and so they end up in a trajectory of fairly long care or morbidity, we would refer to it as in health. But the spouse says, well, I don't want to go into community or facility. I still want to stay in the home. That's where all my friends are. I've got another 25 years planned. And so this is where we see where I'm sure every financial planner who's been out there working with older adults has seen it, where clients fall off what I call the financial cliff. The money just starts to flow out so fast because the focus is on caring for the individual, as we understand it should be. It becomes very difficult, though, if that doesn't fit into a master plan of what are we going to do about that period of life. And so between the situation where we have two homes, we're trying to manage healthcare costs. Most people probably don't realize that once people get into healthcare, it's not uncommon to have more than 20 medications being given to a particular older client. That in itself, trying to imagine managing over 20 different medications and the implications that's going to have on your ability to make choices and good decisions. And so really where I started to look at it was to say, what are the big knobs that we can turn? What are the big levers that we can get our hands on that are likely to change the odds? Same way, like think about it as a portfolio, right? It's not that any one of those elements of a portfolio needs to be the home run. We're managing risk across a portfolio. And so across that is typically, so one would be the home. So what are the things about the home that would, what's its role? Right? Its role is to support us and keep us safe and sheltered for the duration of our life or for as long as we want it to be. So how long do you want to stay at home? Mm-hmm. What are we doing, or what are you doing as a client to support that goal? It's not, if I'm an advisor, I can't tell you what to do. That's not my job. But at the same time, I think it's a great opportunity to say, you told me you want to live to 95. That's what we have in the model. Let's take a look at what's involved in getting to 95. I think we're good for money, and we probably got a little extra, maybe, hopefully. What are we going to do with that to de-risk the other threats that we have? And one of them would be, is our home really designed for us to live to 95? Most people have a hard time knowing what that looks like. There's different ways we can look at it, but generally, if you've ever had knee surgery or someone with knee surgery, that's a great opportunity to understand. I think, Cheryl, we talked earlier, right? And I've had it too. I've got crutches and I've got a cane in the house. I run most days or cycle every day. But those are great opportunities to remind ourselves, how functional is our home when we're not at 100%. So that's one way to look at it. And the other is to say, what are we doing about our health to make sure that we're strong, mobile, and really managing against the risks of daily living? You and I have a risk of crossing the street. Mm-hmm. The risks don't go down when we get older just because we stay at home more. The more we're at home, the more the risks at home, actually, because our exposure is going up. And so the more they start to matter. And if we look at those two elements on their own, they both work together, health and home, typically. But I look at money as a tool, home, it's a tool, it's there for support, and health as a tool. So when you look at health and home as a tool, the way you look at money, well, they're tools for what? Right? So it kind of goes to, so you want to live to 95, I'm just picking a number. Why do you want to live to 95? Right? There's no award. Oh, Cheryl lived to 95. She gets the 95 award. Most of us will say it's about experiences and moments. Like whether it's to see my grandchild graduate college, I want to see great-grandchildren, doesn't matter what it is. Those are the things that really start to get at, what do you really value? So if I'm an advisor in any capacity, I'd like to understand, what do you really value? People will say, well, I value being at home. Why? Right? So why do you value being at home? And so if that's really important, then probably really important to do some things to support that value. And I think that's more when we talk about these conversations, they're value conversations, right? What's the value of whatever I'm trying to offer, or whatever you're potentially trying to offer yourself, right? You and I are offering ourselves a chance at living to 95 or 100. So what values will support that? And so I think it's just a different way of looking at it. And so from all of us as in an advisory capacity, it's not our job to have the answers. No advisors and no financial advisor is going to tell me what the market's going to do at 4:00 today. We don't know these things, but there are certainly things we can do to ask questions that will position our clients to get what they want. And ultimately, if I'm an advisor, I'm looking to get paid for my work. But that's not why I get up in the morning. I get up in the morning to see somebody achieve something, something they value highly. And so, what do you want to get more out of your job? Think about how to give more to those you serve. And ultimately, that is, I think, probably one of the most satisfying things that we can do in our work.
It's really interesting because, advisors talk about, longevity, talk about saving a lot of money, preparing for that longevity, but, health and home don't really enter the conversation very much unless, there's some health reason that somebody might not live until 95, right? Are we planning for something that's not, that's sort of going to get in the way of us living to 95? But otherwise, we're not really talking about how do we have a healthy life? How do we live if we want to stay in our homes? How do we de-risk our homes to prepare for that kind of life? And, I agree with you. You can't necessarily tell people what to do in those regards, but I think it changes, what you're talking about really changes the conversation that people would have, that advisors would have with people. And so how does an advisor start to have those kinds of conversations? Is it more about guidance? Is it more about presenting best practices? Like, what do you see with advisors who are doing what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's there's clearly a growing movement within the community. Some are still kind of stuck in a belief that it's, regulatory environment restricts them, which to me, I've yet to find that's true. Otherwise, no one would be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the easiest place to start is around what you're there for, and that's about money. So one question would be, there's this gap, right? Most of us, when we think about financial advisors, we're generally thinking about the accumulation phase of how do I build up enough money so
Mm-hmm.
I'll have enough for my retirement. And then make sure we have a will, so when we're gone, we know where that money that's left over is going to go. But there's this gap around really through the preservation period, or the drawdown. I think the other question which an advisor is in a great position to ask is, what would you like to do with that money that you have? So we look at it as whatever that number is and say, are we likely to spend it all over the course of your remaining years? Because that's kind of what the plan is. And so if that's the case, it says we don't probably have a big margin of error, right? So we better not have any serious excursions from that. So that's a reason to say, how do we de-risk this a little bit to help make sure that you don't run into an unplanned event earlier than you thought? But I think it's also, certainly if there's any buffer in that plan, to say, where would you like that money ultimately to go? Would you like it to go to healthcare, housing, or your heirs, or your charities?
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is part of your decision. Ultimately, you won't always have the choice, but given the option, what would you like to see happen? And the default will be that it's going to go to healthcare and housing. And when I say housing, I'm not talking about the third property, right? I'm talking about housing in terms of home care or care in a facility housing. And I don't know of anybody who worked for 40 years with the goal of handing it over to healthcare, right? But that's kind of, if we don't have the conversation, that's clearly what we're seeing happening. That is the trend.
Yeah.
And so how do we intervene in that in a conversation? Again, it's the client's right. If that's what they want, great. But let's help them ask the question. Oh, so if you would really like to make sure that your children or you've got some legacy here, there's probably some more things we should think about doing, or that you should think about doing, that are going to help make that a more realistic possibility. And so if you kind of start with, how is it going to impact your money? That, I think, is the place that we can just initialize a conversation that puts everything in a place where money matters, but we recognize money doesn't buy everything. We have a U.S. view that that longevity is a socioeconomic factor, because that's what the studies tell us. But if we step back and say, do the danger of looking beyond our borders, we discover that wealth is really not a big factor in longevity. There are actually other factors that get, and it correlates in the US, but it's actually not a causal. The cause is generally around education, and the education in this case can simply happen by asking some probing questions, some leading questions that we can't answer for someone. Like I can't answer for you what your values are, but I can ask you, like, so what would you, if you had to write down, what are the things you value the most? That's a good exercise and a way, I think, of really investing in a relationship with a client, to say, I'm here with you and I want to be with you for the long haul. And if I'm pretty fortunate, your heirs are going to come into some money and they're probably going to, that relationship is going to transfer to me down the line. So from a sustainability standpoint, that's not a bad business position either, versus once the money's run out, I don't have a lot I can do for you. That's not my business. So it's I think there's a lot of opportunity. It's more around what are the questions to ask and how do you frame them in a way where you're just helping to promote the dialogue.
So what would you recommend? When should these conversations start, Scott? Because if somebody says to their advisor, I don't want to spend my final days in a rest home. I would like to die at home. I would like to spend, the rest of my life in my primary residence. When should that conversation take place? Because that might be, an outpouring of money that they weren't planning on having at any point.
Right. I think really once you're into retirement planning, that's the part of it. So the one I would say, there's a model I take my students through of, it's just an easy one to explain the financial cliff around, should I make some upgrades to my home, for example? Right. So waiting, and so we tend to get paralyzed. Like money, we know what to do with, we know to act on it because the industry has done a great job of designing. If you do this, it's going to compound and it's likely to end up there. We don't do that with health. We don't do that with our home. But if we think about the home, for example, we'll say put $50,000 into making our home bulletproof, essentially for a lifetime. Maybe I'll live there. I'll be the one to decide when I leave, not my house because it's no longer accessible to me. $50,000 probably sounds like a lot of money to anybody, but that payback is usually about 6 months when we think about if you can't stay in your home. So those kind of are investment questions that I think we can put in context. So those really become at the early part of retirement. Retirement planning is the best time because we're still working. So we'll say, maybe I'll work another 3 or 6 months to pay for those upgrades. That's a good trade-off, right? That's the ideal time, is before we retire or early into retirement. Maybe they're busy spending money on travel and things, but we can't just keep putting it off because we get practice at putting it off, and it'll be, we'll be in a reactive mindset, and guaranteed you'll spend more and get less, and it'll be after the event has happened. So you're very much in a recovery mode, a reactionary mode that has limited options. So earlier the better, planting the seeds along the way. And next meeting is, so we talked last meeting about you were going to do something. Did you end up doing that? Right? It's not it's the ongoing conversations that support the client and where they're trying to go.
Yeah, and I think financial planners are in a unique position to be able to model those decisions, and compare them. So what will my retirement look like if I do work a little bit longer and I put money into my home versus I don't do that, and now I'm planning for these long-term care expenses later in retirement, which are inflating much higher than CPI. So I think, helping them make those decisions by modeling what the impact of those decisions could be on their plan is really key.
We can run the Monte Carlo, but that doesn't tell a client very much, right? That's kind of all based on population data and risks. But at the end of the day, n equals 1, and that's the person sitting across the table from you, and that's the only person that matters. All those other models provide a context, but the individual is the one that's going to matter here. And there's all these choices come down to really individual considerations. And in my experience, people are, if they're in the investment community, they're smart people.
Mm-hmm.
They ultimately can come up with really good answers, but they just need help getting the questions started and framing some questions, and it really kind of takes care of itself after that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great lead-in, what resources are available for financial professionals to better educate themselves on these topics?
One of the ones which I used, and I couldn't find it anywhere, so I created one, was just it's an aging in place scorecard. It doesn't have to be aging in place, but you could use it for anything. It's on my Home Ideations website. And it really goes through every room in the house to give you a scoring system, but it gives you options around like A, B, or C. Go by each room and look at each element, A, B, or C, A, B, or C. And as you go through, you develop a score, which means you now will have some idea around what are some things you can do to improve your score. And your score is a good indication of, is your home really ready for the long term, or is it going to be frozen in place? And so that's one of the tools I think is good. There's another one I've got on one or two of my websites, which is a biological age clock. You can go in and put some health markers in. We'll give you a gauge of how am I aging relative to the population. I would say you'd like to be at least 5 or 10 years younger than the average population if you're looking to get extended health span. Those are kind of two that I worked on because I didn't see good options for people. Both of them is free. There's no cost, and you get information back in an email. There's nothing more to it. Those are a couple that come to mind, and the other was like for advisors. I really started this course, which I call the Transition Series, which is really for advisors and their high value clients, where I've run these, where they're interested in getting more knowledge around this and they want to get into a conversation. It's a 3-part series with dialogue and some offline support to really start to help change the trajectory and kind of build this community of thought around how do we help our clients in their value goals around living healthy longer.
And can you just give a little overview of that series? How was it delivered? And I believe you have a special offer to the folks webinar today.
Yeah, so again, I teach this every day, so I don't try to offer the whole course. I always try to squeeze as much as I can in, but it's fast-paced typically. So there's 3 lectures. Each one's about an hour long. First one is behind the confusing noise. That's kind of getting rid of a lot of the background noise of people are just confused. They've got so much information that say, well, what is it that really matters? The second one's the amazing human body, the basics in biology that just connect you with what is aging. No one knows I asked them, no one knows. Well, it's wrinkles. No, that's not aging. That's an outcome of aging. And the third one is playing the healthspan game. So with that kind of backdrop, you've got some understanding of what you're doing and how to actually measure the impact. And now you can start to apply those things in a plan that you can now see has some realistic goals for you and some ways of tracking your way there. And so those are kind of the lecture pieces. There's a workbook that goes with it, so clients can kind of work through it themselves and kind of gauge and come back to it, 6 months in a year, because these things take time. But it's the old compounding, right? A little bit every day you look 6 and 12 months later and realize, wow, I didn't realize that I changed whatever, these 3 things. That's pretty good. And I hadn't really been trying all that hard because it was just little bits at a time, but I was consistent over time.
And then there's some interaction as part of this series, correct?
Yeah, there's a discussions that go through with it, Q&A, because everyone wants to have, questions around it. So you start to build some community if it's a group setting, because there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning that happens. Again, the advisor is simply facilitating, right? That's the beauty of this. They're facilitating it for either for their community of advisors or for their clients. Yeah, and you asked me about discount. I said, yeah. So I was happy to do that. Thanks for doing that. So I said, yeah, for 15% off for anybody who for 90 days from today, anyone who signs up for it, I'd be happy to offer that to them.
And where would they sign up for that?
So they can reach out to me. If you can put my email in here, will you be able to do it? Or I can read it out for people, but it's Scott, Scott, F as in Frank, at home, HOME, ideations, idea, like IDEATIONS.com.
Great. And we'll distribute that email address with your link to your website, Scott, to everybody when we send out the recording of the webinar. So that I know advisors are always looking for value add that they can bring to client meetings or lunches. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much for offering that discount to folks.
Oh, they're fun events. I absolutely love doing them. Love doing them. I love to see the reactions on the clients' faces.
Great.
That's awesome.
We have any questions, Mark?
No, there's no questions in the queue. This has been a great session.
Yeah, well, it's there. Oh, we have one coming.
We have one question. Sounds like this is client facing, or is it filtered through the advisor? I think he's talking specifically about your content.
So I would suggest it's good for advisors to know, but I think advisors' role is really asking the question. So in terms of from an interaction, you want clients dealing directly, with like on the course, for example, with people like me out there getting it directly. I think it's too much to think an advisor could do a job at it, and I'm not sure that it's in even in potential conflict of them kind of being seen to be an expert in their field. So,
right, great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, the half hour has gone by way too quickly, as it usually does with our Trailblazers, but so much great information, Scott, in such important areas to client success. So we thank you very much for your time and all you're doing in this area to help financial professionals and their clients succeed.
Thanks. Great to be with you guys today.
Great.
Right.
Thank you, Scott.
Take care, everybody, and watch out for our Trailblazer in August.